I'm Barry Silverberg, Director of the Center for Nonprofit Studies at Austin Community College, and welcome to Civil Society, where we explore issues affecting our communal well-being through a nonprofit lens. We're a proud partner of ACC TV, but during COVID, we're going virtual for our fourth season. Our center is fully committed to being an anti-racist organization, to accelerating our personal learning journeys, confronting our biases and blind spots, and creating opportunities for others to do the same. This episode is part of our series on the Hispanic Latinx experience in Austin. In January, we will explore the Asian Pacific Islander American and then the Native American Indigenous people experience in Austin. Our 9-part series on the Black experience in Austin can be viewed on our website. As we said in our public statement on racial equity, we're moved by a new sense of urgency to heighten our community's consciousness of institutional racism and systemic impediments to racial equity, and to aggressively progress on the continuum to racial equity, to fulfill America's promise for all of its inhabitants. You can access recordings of earlier episodes and register for future programs at nonprofitaustin.org/civil-society. ACC's Hispanic population of 15,500 students is about 38% of the total student population and is the fastest growing of the college, which is recognized as an Hispanic serving institution, which is a federal designation indicating the college maintains 25% or greater full-time equivalent Hispanic enrollment. ACC was also recognized with the Seal of Excellence by Excellence in Education for its positive role in serving Latino students. My guest today is Gary Moreno. Gary is recently appointed the new director of El Centro, which is ACC's Latino Latin American Studies Center. And in that role, Gary leads El Centro's mission to build connections between the college and the broader Central Texas Latino community. Gary earned his doctorate in Latin American history from the University of Oklahoma and has a forthcoming publication from the University of New Mexico Press, which is titled Charo, The History of a Cultural Icon. He previously taught at Rose State Community College near Oklahoma City. Gary succeeds Dr. Mariano Diaz Miranda, who is a longtime colleague of mine who founded El Centro and passionately led it until his retirement in 2019. Welcome, Gary. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate you guys reaching out and inviting me to this forum.
Thank you. We at the Center for Nonprofits look forward to working closely with you in the coming years. But before we launch into any mind-numbing questions, let me ask you, just tell us a little about Gary Moreno. Why are you a college professor? Why are you doing this? And where do you come from?
Okay, I'm not a Tejano by any stretch of the imagination. I'm originally from California, born and raised there. I'm the son of immigrants from Mexico. My parents are both from, both sides of my family are from Jalisco in central Mexico, tequila country, essentially. And so I'm a first generation American. Spanish was my first language. I learned English in school. And I was lucky enough to grow up in a time and a place that really celebrated Mexican culture. I grew up in East LA in the early 1980s. And, you know, the people who taught me in school, it was obvious to me now. I mean, it wasn't so obvious to me then, but these people had been active in the Chicano movement. You know, they became teachers after they were active in that, and so I got some of that. I was very lucky to be taught by that generation that really knew how to celebrate the Mexican culture, and I had really excellent bilingual education. There was actually the school that I went to. It was called Eastmont Elementary. It was a model for bilingual education throughout the state of California. I remember very vividly how the Eastmont model worked. You had two teachers One would give you instruction in Spanish and the other one would give you instruction in English. And so the class was divided into English speakers and Spanish speakers. And so that way you got instruction in both languages and you learned very quickly. I still remember the day that I tested out of Spanish classes into the English classes. I was really resistant. To kind of take on all the assignments in English, but eventually I relented and you know, it became I became part of the English only class. So I've had a passion for history from a very early age, probably since high school. I knew that I wanted to study history. And so when I left high school and enrolled at Humboldt State University in Northern California, I right away declared my major as being history. And, you know, I had no idea at that point that I was going to eventually end up as a college professor. I was just hoping maybe teach history to high school students. I would be fine with that. But when I got to college, I saw that there was few Latinos teaching history. And so that really drove my desire to see someone like myself teaching our history, not only US history, but also Mexican-American history. I felt like that wasn't always there. The connection to the community wasn't always there. So as the years goes on, that kind of really drove what I was doing and where I was going with this.
Interesting. So in a press release announcing your appointment, you said, or at least somebody said you said, I want El Centro to be a resource for the community for anything related to Latino history and culture here in Austin, an event space, a place where students can come and use the resources we have available. I want everyone to feel welcome, not just Latino students, but anybody who has any interest in Latino culture and history. So talk a little bit about what is El Centro and what are you planning on doing to accomplish those lofty goals? And also, where is it for people who may not know where it physically is?
El Centro is at the Riverside campus. It's been there for probably almost 20 years at this point. It was at the another campus, Eastview campus, or I can't remember the original.
It was in Eastview.
Eastview, right? I think Eastview used to be called something else maybe back in the day. So it's really a student-centered community outreach center. Student-centered, so there's two things going on there, right? Student-centered and then community outreach. But it serves not only the Riverside campus, it serves the entire ACC, you know, the ACC system and greater Austin in general. That's what we mean by the community. We were founded in 1995 by Mariano Diaz Miranda, Dr. Mariano Diaz Miranda and Dr. Terry Thomas. And they had known each other from grad school. And the idea of El Centro came about through conversations that they had. At least that's what Dr. Thomas tells me. And so when they both, you know, arrived here in Austin, they decided to implement those ideas, to put them into action. So Dr. Diaz Miranda served as director until 2019, until his retirement. And Dr. Thomas, she served in an advisory position for a while before moving on. Over the years, El Centro has accomplished a lot of things. It's raised scholarship funds for high school students through the Austin Community Car Show. That's one of the events that, you know, Mariano used to hold. We've also had cultural events, several. There was a 16 de Septiembre, which is a celebration of Mexican independence, Cinco de Mayo celebrations, Day of the Dead festivities, and perhaps what he's most remembered for in the last few years is El Día de la Familia. El Día de la Familia, the Day of the Family, was an event in which, you know, Latino students brought their family members to campus, and, you know, the resources that were available to them were explained, and in this way they got a little knowledge about what was gonna, you know, how their life was gonna change through coming to college. We've also sponsored some Latin American student organizations. LASSO is the student organization that worked with Dr. Diaz Miranda. We also helped ACC attain status as a Hispanic serving institution. You know, that's the designation that you have to have 25% enrollment of Latino students, and we achieved that here at ACC a few years back. most recently, and what excites me a lot about the future going forward is that we recently acquired the Tiharina book collection.
Mhm.
Andres Tiharina teaches history at ACC. He's actually published several books. Perhaps his most famous book is Tejano Empire. It's a social cultural history of South Texas. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. It's a really good book on the rancheros who were here, at the time of conquest by the United States, and it really kind of breaks it down. I really enjoyed the book. So that is a collection of books. His personal collection of books is what we got. There's monographs on Mexican American history, Texas history, U.S. history, classic works from the 60s all the way to the 2000s, right? There are a few rare editions and, a few works of literature and philosophy. So that's going to be a resource now that is available to the students at El Centro. They're going to be able to come to El Centro and complete any project that they have over those subject matters. It's like a one-stop shop kind of a deal, right? If you have a project on any of those topics come in, we may have a few books and a few resources for you to do that. So, over the time, hopefully we'll be able to add to that collection and allow it to expand. So, from its foundation, there has been a continual struggle to define El Centro. What is it? Is it primarily a community-based organization, or is it primarily a student-centered organization, one that is focused on academics? So, my search as the new director is to find continuity with the past, to go back into the past and to see those initiatives that were really fruitful for us and really had some payoffs and gains. So my goal is to refocus El Centro on students and academics. I'm going to rely on the conference rather than, the fiestas that we've traditionally had in the past to help achieve, student success, to help bridge those equity gaps that are so important for us to do so at the community college level. So yeah, that's what we do in a nutshell at El Centro.
That's a pretty good explanation. Thank you. So in an interview about Hispanic Heritage Month, conducted, I think it's posted on ACC's website, you said it's important for us to celebrate Hispanic heritage because in the past, and in many communities across the country, our heritage has been used against us. We must reclaim it and celebrate it not only for ourselves, but for others to see that we're proud of who we are. Obviously, it relates exactly to what you just said. So what did you mean by that? Or what do you mean by that?
By how the past has been used against us?
Yes.
The past has been used against us in various ways. When I was growing up as a child, I constantly heard, learn English, right? As I grew up, that became that mantra became, learn Spanish, don't forget Spanish. So as Latinos, we're constantly get contradictory messages about our culture, right? And our history. We have to learn to value a new culture while not losing so much of our, heritage of our mother culture, where we come from. And that's a really hard thing to do, a fine line to navigate. And part of it is that there's so much shame attached to being Latino. When we look at the dominant culture, when we look at the predominant imagery, it doesn't really look or sound like us, right? And so as growing up Latino, you begin to ask yourself, why doesn't my Christmas look like the Christmas that I see on TV, right? Or why doesn't my lunch look like the lunch that I see kids from my age group that they should be taking? And that's how it starts, really shaming your own culture. So there's much shame to being Latino here in Texas, I feel like, and that revolves around the history of discrimination against Mexicans, right? In the past, one of the ways that Mexicans in Texas tried to protect themselves is by adopting what was known as a whiteness strategy. This is the idea that Mexicans shouldn't be discriminated against because Latinos are technically white through their European ancestry, right? And this was a common legal argument used in the 1950s and 60s here in Texas. This took place at the very same time that there was an opposing ideology coming from Mexico, right? And that at the same time, after the Mexican Revolution, there was really a celebration of mestizo identity, of a mixed race heritage, right? So I have no doubts that both of these ideas were held in the heads of many people at the time, especially within the Mexican community, right? That they tried to prove their whiteness, but at the same time, on their Mexican side, they were celebrating their mixed heritage. And so I think this is really the way that people are taught to hate who they are, to hate their culture and to hate their heritage, right? To reject it. And so that's what I mean when I say that, you know, our culture has been used against us. And that's why it's important to really reclaim our culture and be proud of who we are as a community. We shouldn't deny our culture. We shouldn't deny that, you know, burritos are better for lunch than a pack of Lunchables, which is an idea that I had in my head growing up, right? We should learn to master English, but also to keep our connections to Spanish is basically what I wanted to get to with that.
I think the experience you're describing is, while not the same, is very similar to many ethnic groups, and the return of the third generation to identity.
Yeah.
As you said, you grew up saying speak English. And even as you talked about your background, you referenced that moving on to the English only class was perceived as an accomplishment at that point.
It was.
Yeah. So most Americans, most Anglos, don't know very much about Mexico, don't know very much about Mexican Americans, don't know very much about Latino history in the United States. What do you think can be done to increase greater awareness of that rich experience?
Take a history class in Latino history or Mexican American history.
Do you have any particular class do you want to recommend?
Any Latino class, any class that you have on any kind of subject matter on Latino history or Latino culture is really good for us to reference and to take on, I think, as a society. I think in general, people don't, in history, history is just something that we don't have a lot of attachment to as a society.
Unfortunately.
It's unfortunate, you know. So we have to make the Latino experience central to the history of the United States. That's what I think. You know, Latino history is American history. Latino history is U.S. history. We have to kind of put that idea into our mind, right? That these experiences of these communities, as they experienced them here, we have to talk about that. We have to, you know, have discussions about it. Really, we need to reject the white settler narrative. And when we come, you know, to Texas, that's a really important thing. It's the predominant historical view, the white settler narrative that, you know, valorizes the triumphant history of white settlers, and it really downplays or hides the contribution of minorities. We have to get rid of that. We have to, you know, get rid of that in the classroom. We also need to acknowledge that we are a country that was founded on white racial supremacy. I think that's an idea that is unfortunately now been politicized recently. The notion that we're not a country that is founded on white supremacy is really a troubling one, because it's kind of a gateway idea into other possibly racist ideas, right?
Absolutely.
So there's no denying that we're a country that was founded on the principles of white supremacy. We can't deny that. People can't deny the overwhelming evidence that there is out there, you know, telling us that. So denying or simply ignoring that we are a country founded on white supremacy prevents the next phase, which is, I think, really important, and that's reconciliation. You know, reconciliation with our historical past. If we can't acknowledge that, you know, we are a country founded on white racial supremacy, then we can never move on to forgiving, you know, our ancestors or whoever it is that we need to forgive for those previous tragedies. That's kind of, I think, as I have more and more conversations with people, that's the idea that keeps coming into my mind, that those white settler narratives are really kind of detrimental to us as a society.
I think overall, the way history, at least as I learned it, was very simple. We were right, everybody else was wrong, and we won which is ridiculous in terms of the complexities that really take place. You know, it might be very interesting if you would be willing to perhaps send us a little short bibliography that we could attach to this tape for the average person who might want to learn some basic texts, who might want to learn more about Latino history.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
that would be very, very helpful. So while you were at Rosa State College, and I had to do a little research for this, one student wrote on the Rate My Professor's website about you, "I like this professor's chill demeanor." Okay. Lectures are supplemented with movie clips and sometimes music to break up the monotony. Attend every lecture and take proper notes, as the tests aren't based on book content. So how would you describe your teaching philosophy and style?
You know,
I know you chill.
yeah. I know exactly which review you're referencing, and I think that was actually my first review on Rate My Professor, and I think I know who the student was. But you know, my advisor told me, Dr. Terry Rougeley, he told me that you're never as relevant to the students as when you start teaching. Okay, because that's when the age gap is the least, right? As you go on, the age gap widens and you become less relevant to the students. So I think that's partially what's going on in that, right? It was my first teaching gig, my first semester. Maybe they thought I was, you know,
A boy wonder.
Excuse me?
A boy wonder.
Yeah, not a boy wonder, but maybe they were charmed by my, inability to teach. As a pro, being so green. So really what I do in the classroom is I rely on three themes. I rely on storytelling. It's a big component of history. We are telling stories and we have to tell compelling stories. I rely a lot on the biography. I think people learn history well when we put it into a personal story and personalize it. I rely upon imagery. My students know in my classes that there's lots of imagery involved with it. What I do is I essentially create collages for each subject matter, and this I give it to the students via PowerPoint. And there's a lot of also movie clips. This has been one of the things that I haven't been able to do well as we've transitioned to all online courses, because in traditional online, traditional on the ground course, I could just pop in a movie, show them a real quick clip, 10 minutes, right? That becomes a little bit more complicated now in the digital age. So I haven't been able to do that, and I've really kind of missed out on that, because the students really like seeing, clips, movie clips, dramatic clips of what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
And then there's sound. I think that quote makes an allusion to it, that I use music. I use period music. I try to use period music. It gets a little bit more complicated when you get into the 19th century, right? But even then, there's things that you can find that you can play for the students that are really relevant. So I try to engage them on all sorts of levels, like visual, auditory, and that's really my plan in any classroom, to engage them on as many levels as I possibly can, because I'm a student that I'm very captivated by imagery, and I know some students work well like that, but not all students, all
Right.
students. So that's basically my teaching style and philosophy.
So this is probably a unfair question, but you teach U.S. history, you teach a course on Mexican American history. What are the top 2, 3, whatever things that you want your students to leave your class with?
I hope they leave with everything that I teach them. I hope they take as much as they can absorb. But yeah, you're right. Only a couple of things are unfortunately what they take away sometimes. So really what I want my students to know in my Mexican American history class is that the roots of Mexican Americans in this country are deep, from colonization all the way to the present. Of course, at colonization, they weren't Mexican Americans. They were, Spanish citizens at that point. But that's what I really want to convey to my students, whether it's the foundation of, the colony in Nuevo Mexico, or, the settlement of Texas, or the, settlement of California, Or even, when we go look to Florida and we realize, St. Augustine was the first permanent settlement that was founded here in this country. And you come to the realization that Spanish was the first European language that was spoken in what is now the continental United States. That often gets lost in the conversations that we have over, English education or English only. People forget, like, yes, Spanish was actually the first language that was spoken here. So that's what I want to convey to my students, that our roots here are deep, and that, there's no cause for them to feel like outsiders. I feel like is part of that. And like I said, Latino history is U.S. history. I think that's a notion that I have to hammer over the head of my students a lot. It's just, remember that this is Latino history, but it still is U.S. history. Don't compartmentalize it and put it away into a different area. Celebrate it for what it is, which is U.S. history.
And I think that's a dilemma that any ethnic history has.
Yeah.
I was very involved in bringing Judaic studies to campuses way before you were born. And there was that argument, was it identity studies or was it academic study? And it doesn't gain legitimacy unless it's the academic study. That's really important. So you focus on Mexican-American history. The Latino, the Hispanic, whatever language you use, is far more diverse.
Right.
Speak a little bit about the diversity of the Hispanic community and perhaps its experience in America.
Wow. There's so much diversity when it comes to the Latino population with regards to race, with regards to religion and politics. And so I think since we just went through the election, let's kind of put it into that context. Politically, the Latino community is very diverse. I feel like there was this idea out there, perhaps on the left, that, if you just get enough Latinos to go out there and vote, they're somehow all going to vote Democratic, right? That's the idea. They're all going to be liberals. And what we saw in the last election is that didn't happen. At least that didn't happen in places like Texas. It may have happened in places like, Arizona and Nevada, but definitely not Texas and definitely not Florida. So what we see from those, results of that election is that Latinos are incredibly diverse in their beliefs and their political beliefs. I think that Latino conservatism is very deep rooted. And I actually think most Latinos, when you talk to them and you get down to it, I think most of them are conservatives down in their heart. I think they vote in the way Democratic oftentimes for political expediency, but when you talk to them and the rationale, the reason that they give you, they're very much conservative. So that's one of the diversities that I see a lot playing out recently, the diversity in the political opinions in the Latino community and how different that is. The Cuban Americans in Florida versus the multi-generational Mexican American families that have been living here for a long time, and then you have more liberal populations in California and other places as well. So that's one. We're not even going to get into the diversity of the racial diversity that we see in Latin America, which is huge, right? You have, I think recently scholars have begun to discover Afro Latino populations in all sorts of countries that they didn't know existed. I think Mexico is going right now through a reckoning in discovering its Afro-Mexican populations that have been ignored for such a long time. It's particularly on the Caribbean coast, and then on the West Coast as well. Down south, there's some significant Afro-Mexican populations. So yeah, I mean, there's incredible diversity in the Latino community.
A simple but maybe profound question. So what defines a Hispanic or Latino? What is it? Is it language?
Right.
What is it that puts you into the group as opposed to leaving you outside the group?
What's a Hispanic or what's a Latino, right?
That's right.
That's
who is?
That is a very profound question. I have a lecture for that is kind of like 30 minutes long. So I'm going to give you the short version.
Okay, we'll append that to this interview.
Hispanic, which is the old term that is preferred here in Texas, it means that you are someone who associates with Spanish culture and Spanish identity, right? Hispanic. That's what it means. So there's a little bit of a race element to that, okay? Because a lot of people here in Texas, a lot of people in New Mexico preferred the term Hispanic because it tied them to Spain, right? It allowed them to deny the fact that they may have had indigenous roots or may have had Black roots in there, you know? So that's the problem, I think, with using the term Hispanic. Now, Latino is a definition that is defined, a word that is defined by language, right? Because in the term Latino, which was a term that was created in the 1860s, it was created by Louis Napoleon III when he tried to, make inroads into Latin America. And so he created this term Latino to create solidarity with Latin Americans, right? We all speak a Latin-based language, whether it's French, whether it's Portuguese, whether it's Spanish. So we are all kind of under this umbrella of Latinos. That's what it means. So it's a little bit easier, I think, to define a people via their language than via their race, okay? Because you get into that tricky murkiness of what is a Hispanic, and it'll offend some people, and some people won't be offended. But with the term Latino, what you're doing is, it's really, that's an umbrella, the widest umbrella term that you can use for the community. So what you're saying there, you can be Portuguese, you can speak Portuguese, like a Brazilian, right? That's a Latino. You get a little into murkier waters, with like Haitians. I don't think Haitians would consider themselves Latino. I'm not sure, but even though they do speak a Latin-based language, or you couldn't even consider, under that definition, you couldn't even consider people from Quebec as Latinos, right? Because they speak French, a Latin-based language. So it gets a little bit murky. There's always exceptions to the rule. But what I tell my students is, if you have any doubts of what somebody is, just your default setting should be Latino, or Latinx, if that's what you prefer.
Yeah. Well, it's always good to speak to a history professor, because I just learned a whole lot of stuff. Okay, I appreciate that. So you're publishing a book soon on Charo, the history of a cultural icon. I actually downloaded your dissertation, as I've told you.
Oh my God, you may be the only person that's ever done that.
Well, probably your mother and father, and probably some family members.
Maybe.
I began to read it and right away discovered that Charo were horsemen rather than the Charo, the actress and comedian.
Right.
I noticed behind you, I think it says Wild Bill, but the Wild West and the connection to that. So tell us a little bit about what the book, what the thesis behind the book is. What's the key learning points?
Oh man, the charro is so hard to define because the definition of this equestrian changes over 2 centuries. Most dissertations are they'll take out one event and they'll look at it maybe 5-10 years. I gave myself the task of creating a history over 200 years. So I had to learn a lot of different things. I had to learn a lot of different time periods in Mexican history. But for me, this project started at Cal State Long Beach when I was doing my grad work there. I was fascinated by fashion. I had just read Valerie Steele's History of the Corset, and it really inspired me. If I said to myself, if somebody could write a whole book about the corset, then I most definitely can write a book about the traje de charro, what a charro wears, and how that has evolved over time. And so that was really my motivator in that. And so it's hard for me to put it into a nutshell because it changes so much in significance over time. But basically what my main thesis is, and what I hope people who read my book eventually take away from it, is that the charro, which is traditionally seen as a symbol of Mexico, is actually made up from many different parts of the world. Okay, whether it's the straw hats that are taken from the Philippines, or the embroidery style that comes from the traje de luces from the Spanish bullfighters. So many things go into making this symbol that is traditionally conceived of as a Mexican symbol. And I propose that there's an American charro, okay, a version of the charro that was created north of the border, right? And there are some elements that we have contributed to this symbol. And so I'm trying to take the charro away from very simply just the Mexicans. I'm trying to claim it for us here north of the border as a symbol that we have infused and very much given much meaning to, I think so. There's been Wild West performers, like some of these performers that you see behind me, that did that. And some of them were female, some of them were men, and they all contributed a little bit to that character.
Well, I'm not finished with your dissertation yet, but I got to tell you, it's interesting. I'm actually going to read it. It's really interesting. So
yeah, well, you got the rough version, man. I would hope you'd wait for the book. The book has
no, I'll read the book too. What the hell? Okay. When is the book coming out?
I still have to work with the publisher. I've been kind of dragging my feet over the last couple of years. It's the imagery that you have to use for something like this. It's like some of these images are copyrighted and people hold on to them very much. And so that's the point that I'm at. The writing is done. It's just now writing people and having them get their permission to be able to use their images.
Yeah.
And what, for this book, for this project, there should be good images with it because
absolutely.
It is a visual topic.
Yeah. So knowing what you know today, being where you are now, what would you say to that boy who was learning English in school, who was feeling marginalized or distanced, alienated, whatever, by the fact that you weren't eating the same foods as the other people were?
Right.
What would you tell that boy today, what he should look forward to?
I had this joke for the longest time that if I could do it all over again, I'd probably be an electrician, but I say that, but I know it's not true. I know that even if I would have probably been happy as an electrician working with my hands, but there would always be something that I would feel was missing, which was the intellectual pursuit that I think drives me. So I would tell my younger self, I guess, to trust yourself. I would tell any student really to trust themselves. If you believe in your pursuits, then go for it, right? Don't wait for anybody else to validate what you're doing. If you believe deeply in what you're doing, then you should trust that, and you should trust that you can take that to its completion. I think that's part of the lesson of getting into academia and getting into higher ed and doing something that is difficult, not just academia. That's just any complex undertaking that you do. So people won't always understand what you're doing. They may not understand. They may doubt you. You may doubt yourself, right? But just trust yourself, and that should be enough to get you through most adversity, I would feel.
Would that little boy have listened?
Yeah, he probably wouldn't have known what I'm talking about. He'd be like, whatever.
So, and you just began to address it. So you're a role model, or you will be a role model for a lot of the students who, and a lot of the Hispanic students particularly, are first in their family to go to college. And obviously you've reached higher heights in your own education. So what are the lessons learned, the hard-earned wisdom that you would share with those students, or will share, or are sharing with those students?
Hard work, man. Hard work,
It ain't easy.
You gotta be comfortable with it. You gotta do it. It sucks sometimes, but keep at what you're doing. Really, is that's the wisdom that I have. I think just trust yourself and be diligent in what you're doing. Also take pride in what you're doing, right? That I think that's a large part of it. Take pride. You may not like what you're doing at the moment, but take pride in it, and you'll turn in a great product. So long as you do that. So that would be my advice to students. Trust yourself and take pride in what you do.
Who have been your mentors? Who have been your role models?
A lot of my mentors, I mean, besides my parents who, came to this country and sacrificed so much, and my grandparents who came to this country and sacrificed so much, my mentors have largely been teachers, believe it or not. And that's not surprising, right? I always had good relationships with my teachers, whether it was, in grade school or in high school or even through grad school. I was very fortunate to have, mentors and advisors who steered me the right way and who believed in me in what I was doing. And that's a great big help to a student as well, to have somebody there who believes in them, who sees something in them when they perhaps don't know what the road ahead looks like. That's just a very reassuring thing for a student, to know that somebody that has your back in that academic sense, that they're there to be your cheerleader, that they're there to cheer you on and to encourage you to go further. So I can, Dr. Terry Rougeley over at OU was a very good advisor to me. Dr. Sterling Evans, same place. But even going back all the way to like high school, Dr. LeBeau, or not Dr. I've had a lot of great teachers over the years.
Good. So let me return to the question of the, well, let me just ask you the question rather than characterize it.
All right.
In a 2016 study by the Center for Talent Innovation, which was called Latinos at Work, Unleashing the Power of Culture, which was reported in Harvard Business Review. The basic conclusion was that most Latinos in the US do not feel they can bring their whole selves to the office. And this may relate to the school's environment as well. Most Latinos, 76%, repress parts of their personas at work. They modify their appearance, their body language, communication style, and all those elements of their history and their social lives. What's your thoughts about this challenge, both as it relates to workplace, as it relates within the college? Do you feel that there are Latino faculty, students who don't feel they can be who they are? And what can we all be doing to eliminate that sense of enemy and that sense of marginality?
Well, it's been really hard for me to get a gauge on just the community and, individual professors and students just, being under COVID lockdown. It's hard to make those connections with people. And I've only been here for 2 months, but I can tell you more than likely, that's a reality of being a minority in academia. I think there's a lot of self-doubt that comes with that. The imposter syndrome, oftentimes that comes with that. But really what you're talking about is like putting on a white mask, right? Like Frantz Fanon talks about that in one of his major works, and he's talking about, the African-American community in that sense, or the African community in that sense. How we have to do this as minorities. We have to put on a white mask to interact with the white world, right? I think that's a common experience for most minorities and very common for minorities in academia and higher ed. We're in a field that is not predominantly Latino. So we have to, continually engage with Anglo-Americans. And yeah, I go through that. I think there's nothing wrong with that. We have to interact with different people. We have to know how to communicate with them. I remember growing up, for me, one of the big things was that, Anglos really like to shake your hand. That's how they communicate. That's how they communicate a lot of things. And that's not such a big thing in the Latino community. And so I had to learn the handshake, and what that means in social interactions. There's nothing wrong with that. I think when you do get some troubling aspects of that is, sometimes I want to let that mask down and I want to be myself. I don't want to be so professional. But then I run the risk of, possibly being, pigeonholed in my behavior. If I act a little too ghetto, or if I say the wrong thing, then they may categorize me into one of these little boxes that they have for me. So that's the pitfall for most minorities in academia, right? It's like you want to be yourself, but you're not sure how that is going to be perceived or taken. And then there's like I said, mentioned previously, the imposter syndrome. The imposter syndrome is quite real amongst minority academics. We are battered to get to where we get to, right? And so there's a lot of self-doubt of like, wow, why did I make it here? How did I make it here? Do I deserve to be here? And that's just a product of continually having to go up against struggles all the time. They're right around the corner, these pitfalls, and you become kind of hypersensitive to all that. And that kind of leads into this imposter syndrome that many of us have when we get here.
I think it's really important for people to understand that, because I think that, as we mentioned in the opening, we're focused on trying to be as anti-racist as we can with all the prejudices and baggage that need to increasingly become conscious of. That we need to provide the space, the acknowledgement, and the appreciation for when people are more authentic,
Mm-hmm.
and not try to stick them in these little boxes, as you said.
Right.
And that's a great challenge, particularly for somebody in your role as someone who your role almost is to be a role model to a lot of these students. So,
Right.
but I appreciate everything you've said. I appreciate the time you've taken. Thank you very much. I've actually learned a lot, and I expect to learn more about the fashion of the charros as I move past the 130 dissertation that I've read so far.
Nice, very nice.
You'll quiz me on it someday.
I will.
So I want to thank you for being here today. And I, again, on behalf of my team at Center for Nonprofits and myself, want to wish you the best as you begin your career. And I look forward to us continuing to work together. So
Thank you, Barry. Thank you for having me.
it's my pleasure. Thank you for watching and participating in civil society. And thank you, Kate Tolliver, our managing producer, for all of your support in making today's program and all of our programs possible. You can read more about Gary Moreno and review a bibliography, which he has said he will send us, that will help us all learn more about Latino history and the United States and the issues we just discussed, and view previous and future episodes of Civil Society at nonprofitaustin.org/civil-society. You all be safe and have a great day. Thank you very much for watching.